Hello and welcome to another Stellarian Games video. In this episode, we're going to be continuing our look at this large sand skiff and wrapping up the details of all of the little extras and embellishments that go along with it. These are the little ballistas that go on the sides, one up on the front, which is a larger version, and just some of the finer detailed painting to finish up this large sand skiff. So let's get right into it and see how this one is done. Okay, to continue this craft, we are going to use some wire screen, and I'm just cutting out a strip and then starting to cut it to shape to fit alongside those side pontoon sections of these sailing ships. Once I get it into place, I'm kind of folding it over the ends to make those curved sections that'll hook onto those crossbars. Then we're using some hot glue and some twine and gluing that into that screen as well to form kind of the bracing and support rope that would be holding up this netting for the sides. Now moving on to the ballistas. We're using some small sprues and small wooden craft pieces. I'm cutting off the heads of two small brad nails. Those brad nail heads are going to be glued into the bottom of those bases. That will be the section that the magnet can adhere to later on. So I just needed some good chunk of metal in there for the magnet to stick to. Now we're going to start forming the body of the ballista, just using some matchsticks, cutting out a couple different pieces, gluing on some very small nuts, and then starting to work on the actual bow section of the ballista. Using some cardstock, just kind of curving it into shape and ready to start assembling. Just using some white glue to attach the bow section to the body. And then forming the larger ballista for the front center section using several matchsticks to form kind of a wide base. I wanted this one to be a little bit larger and more imposing looking. Now I have some very fine wire and just kind of shaping it into the shape of the bowstring for these ballistas. And once that's in place, just adding a little white glue to those tips and just setting that into place, and it'll harden and firm up in place. Then just adding some glue to the base that we had made before and gluing the ballista to the top. Next, we're going to start working on all of the ammunition. I'm using some thin cardstock and just kind of cutting out some small triangles and dipping some pinheads, small pinheads, into glue and gluing them onto those little triangles. Those will be the broadheads for all of the different arrow types. Then I'm cutting off the heads of all of those little pins so that they are headless and will form the ammunition. Then getting the right size for the ballistas and cutting those heads off as well. Then these are some round toothpick shafts, and I'm gluing on several of the small pinheads to these. The idea is that these are going to be kind of a scatter shot. The larger ballista would shoot the large shaft, and then the small arrows would separate and kind of form kind of a scatter shot. I'm forming a small band of paper around those to hold those pins into place. Cutting out again some thin cardstock and wrapping it around the end of a paintbrush, just forming a small paper tube. This will be the quiver that gets glued onto the mast sections for the ammunition to be stored. But right now, just forming the empty tube. Then putting just a little blob of hot glue in the end to seal the end. Now using some cardboard from a box and forming the back sections of the land anchor sections, shaping them up, and after spray painting everything black, coming in and coating the different pieces in the base brown to form kind of the base layer of most of these pieces. Then using a dry brush khaki over the netting, this gives it a very nice light netting look. Then coming along with some metallic paint and highlighting the bow sections of the ballista. I'm also using that same paint on the ammunition broadheads as well. So on those scatter shots, just going in and hitting each of those little broadhead sections. Then using some bronze color, picking out some highlights of different pieces, especially the more mechanical pieces. Then using a very fine tan, picking out some of the shafts of the ammunition just so that they stand out a little bit more compared to the other brown base coats. I also 3D printed a captain's wheel, and I'm hitting all of the spokes of that captain's wheel for piloting the vessel as well. And using some of that brass and highlighting the ring on the wheel as well. And also picking out just some detail on the back side of it. Now just gluing those shafts into place on all of the different ballistas. This is the main scattershot ballista in the front. All right. Using some tacky glue, we're gluing on the netting into place, so that's ready to go. And then gluing on the quivers on the side and have the ballistas in place as well with magnets. Going back to those quivers, I also added a little bit of detail to each of those tubes. This is some, I think, shade samples, and just cut those out and wrap them just to give them a little bit more detail. Then for the steering mechanism, I'm using some necklace chain and kind of wrapping it through the different components, getting it ready to be glued into place, and then just pouring a little white glue to let that bottom set up. Now I'm fitting the ground anchors to the sides using some cut off nails and kind of pinning them into place as well as gluing them into place, but the pins actually, the nail heads actually form kind of the pivot points for those ground anchors. Then working the chain through, getting them ready to be chained or glued into place, and just adding a drop of glue right to the tip of those chains. All right, that was a lot of extra detail, but this was definitely a fun project to do. Lots of interesting little pieces to add to the land skiffs, and I think the final product turned out really well. So I hope you like this project. If you do, please hit the like button and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.